All right, this is part 1 of your evolution PowerPoint for this unit. So before we even get into evolution, we need to talk about the background of diversity. So the time scale, or as it's known, the geologic time scale, and how everything evolved during these time periods. So you have two major things, the Precambrian and the Phanerozoic. So the Phanerozoic has three major parts to it: Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. But let's go back to the Precambrian. So during the Precambrian period, this is what happened. Your oldest prokaryotes appear. So 2,500 million years ago, so MYA equals million years ago. Okay, so that's when your oldest prokaryotes appeared. Eukaryotes then appeared 1,500 million years ago. And multicellular organisms, so remember, multicellular organisms are eukaryotes, but these were probably unicellular. Multicellular, 850 million years ago in the fossil record. So let's look at this picture here that kind of shows it. So you have the three major parts. We go back of the Phanerozoic, so the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. So right here. And you look. So here is your Paleozoic. Then you have your Mesozoic. Then you have your Cenozoic. Okay? So here, this is your first, pretty much of everything. First fish, first chordates, first vascular land plants, first amphibians. Reptiles start to diversify. You have seeded ferns, trees. All of that happens. Then we get into this one. This is where your Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. This is your dinosaurs. Okay, so dinosaurs are in the Mesozoic. So then after that, we have mammals and humans are in the Cenozoic. This one shows a little bit different as well. But if you remember, there's also some big extinctions, which is why we don't have dinosaurs anymore today. So there was a giant extinction before dinosaurs walked the earth. And there was another extinction that got rid of the dinosaurs. So, takeaway points. The end of the Precambrian period was 542 million years ago. This is when soft-bodied organisms began to develop. Your Paleozoic is your Cambrian explosion, which all of that diversity, ocean changes, land plants, insects, all of those things started appearing in the Paleozoic. Your Mesozoic then is your Jurassic period. This is your mammals, your dinosaurs, your flowering plants. But then we also have a mass extinction caused by a meteorite. And also the separation of something called Pangaea, which I'll show you on the next slide. The final is the Cenozoic. So this is when mammals began to dominate land, massive diversification, humans survived the Ice Age. All of these things happen in the Cenozoic time period. So here's Pangaea. This is the idea that present-day continents began like this up here. So they began all connected, and then they eventually shifted as the years progressed. So you look to 225 million years ago, 200 million years ago, 135, 65, and then this one down here is our present-day continents. So this is what is referred to as Pangaea up there. All right, so what is a species? This should be review for you. So a species, organisms that can do two things. One, produce in a natural setting, and two, reproduce to create fertile offspring. Those are the two most important things. So remember this, a liger is not a species. A mule, nope, not a species either, because they are sterile. They can't reproduce to produce more offspring. Now, are dogs considered a species? Yes. And all types of dogs could technically mate. By can they mate, I mean can sperm and egg combine to form a fertilized baby, not can they physically mate. Population then is a group of members of the same species. So a lot of the evolutionary terms and natural selection and things like that refer to a population of organisms, not an individual. So first of all, who was Charles Darwin? So he was a British naturalist, and he traveled on a ship called the Beagle. Basically, he was taking notes. He had a big notebook, and he took lots of notes about everything he saw on this trip. And One of the most important places that he's known for going is the Galapagos Islands, which is in South America. So some things he observed are finch beaks, iguana claws, and different tortoise shell shapes. So like tortoises are like kind of turtles, but they just live on land. So the shapes of their shells. So his finches, though, are what he's most known for. So Darwin's finches. He observed many different varieties of these finch beaks, and he concluded that the beak shape was suited to the life and food source of each type of finch. So for example, if you look at this picture down here, what shape of beak would an insect eater have? Well, an insect eater is not going to have a huge beak like this because that's not going to help him get insects. Usually they have a sharp beak. So let's see, kind of like these guys down here, down here. It's hard to tell with some of these pictures, but some of them are insects or seeds. Depends on seeds. Now, seed-wise, this guy is going to eat really big seeds, whereas these guys are just going to eat little seeds. So you have to look at the difference. A bird with a really small beak isn't going to be able to crack open large shelled nuts or things like that. Darwin also observed iguanas, and he observed mainland versus island iguanas. Now, the idea was that they both started on the mainland, and the island iguanas became separated on the Galapagos Islands, and as a result, had different characteristics. So the island iguanas have large claws that help them climb rocks, and if you notice, they also look quite a bit different. Whereas the mainland iguanas have small claws to help them climb trees. The Galapagos Islands do have trees, yes, but they also have a lot of your lava rock type of environment to where these iguanas up here need to be able to survive on rocks, whereas on the mainland, lots of rainforest. They need the trees. So Darwin's conclusions. So after observing the finches, he reasoned that the environments are different for different finches. Environments are also based on what they eat. So his conclusion, the biggest takeaway point, is that species gradually change over time to adapt to their environment. Notice how it says species. It's not an individual. An individual finch is not going to change its beak over the course of its life to be able to eat different seeds. It's a species. He also coined the term adaptation. So it's a trait that helps organisms survive and reproduce, increasing their overall fitness. So his theory of evolution is that species change over time, and this is based on many observations, research, and sources of evidence by Darwin and other scientists. He also published something called The Origin of Species, and this explained his findings and everything he found on the island. So let's brainstorm. What does survival of the fittest mean? This doesn't mean it's necessarily the person that's most in shape or most able to withstand something. If you look at this comic, it shows a beaver here that has a chainsaw as one of his arms. So kind of a funny comic showing you, but if you look, obviously this beaver would be able to cut down a lot more trees than this guy over here. So is it fitter? So natural selection is sometimes described as survival of the fittest. So if your friends are arguing about what the phrase survival of the fittest means, this is what they said. So we're going to say 4 friends and figure out who you support the most. So Dora thinks fit means bigger and stronger. Lance means fit means more apt to reproduce. Felix thinks fit means able to run faster, and Jose thinks fit means more intelligent. In all honesty, fit is more apt to reproduce. An organism that has certain characteristics that make its offspring more likely to survive is going to be the fittest species or fittest animal. So if you think about someone that has lots of kids, technically they have a higher fitness than someone who has no children because they're passing on their traits to the population, and that person with no children is not passing on any traits. So the biggest thing you need to understand, a survival of the fittest does not mean bigger and stronger. Okay? That super big, buff, muscle guy is not more fit than someone who has 10 children, because quite honestly, the person with 10 children is more fit because she's passed on more traits. So a couple examples of real-world evolution. We have the Irish potato famine. What happened was there was a lack of variation. So a fungus that was parasitic wiped out the entire potato crop. Pesticide resistance, on the other hand, insects that are resistant to pesticides can survive, reproduce, and keep eating those crops. As a result, how this happened was some insects were born and they just had a natural kind of way of to where the insecticide didn't bother them. So then, as a result, those offspring, even when the crops were sprayed with a pesticide, could still survive. So then they kept reproducing, and their trait to not die from the pesticide was passed on to their offspring. So as a result, you get offspring that are resistant to pesticides in general. And then antibiotic resistance, which we've talked about quite a bit during the bacteria unit, but bacteria reproduce asexually or they can swap DNA. But if you don't take all of your antibiotics, you still have those bacteria left in your body that have that resistant trait. So those bacteria are going to reproduce and pass that resistant trait on to their offspring, and then before you know it, you're sick again, and antibiotics can't make you feel better. So survival of the fittest, one more time to go into it, the best adapted individuals will be the most likely to survive and reproduce. So another key word here is natural selection. So the environment selects the best adapted individuals. So a cold environment is going to favor an animal that has a thicker coat than another animal in its species because the environment is determining who lives and who dies. Really big takeaway, like I said, fittest does not mean strongest. It means best adapted. So what can affect natural selection? Things like overproduction. So if you produce more offspring than can possibly survive, it makes competition a factor, which is when the best adapted individuals will survive. So you think about sea turtles when they hatch, all those sea turtles rush for the water. Well, the fastest ones are going to get there first and be less likely to get eaten by birds. Maybe ones that have a lighter belly and a darker top are going to blend in more and be less likely to get eaten by fish. So the ones that have the best traits are going to survive and live to reproduce more sea turtles. Another thing that affecting natural selection is the competition between organisms. So they use the same resources. They fight for land, they fight for water, they fight for food. There's competition between the same species or different species. So competition in general, the one that can best win that competition is going to be the one that can feed itself and feed its offspring. And genetic variation. So this is the difference between individuals. If you think back to what I just said about the potato famine, the potatoes all had the same characteristics, so they all died. If we have differences in between us, which is why you look different than even your mom or your dad, is why as a population, a disease couldn't wipe out the entire population. So variations come from things like mutations or alleles separating in meiosis. And a strong species, really, really important to know this, has many, many, many variations. That way, like I said, not all members are susceptible to the same thing. And then is the inside of your body survival of the fittest? Like we mentioned with the antibiotics, if you've ever been given antibiotics and not finished all of them or taken them for something that's not a bacteria, you're causing your body to be survival of the fittest, and you're going to develop superbugs in your body. All right, and that's it for these notes.